We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast was produced, the Gadigal People of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present.
It's 1985 and we're in the Sydney suburb of Redfern on notoriously rough Everleigh Street. 12-year-old Jeff Morgan has just made the decision to leave home. Gambling and alcoholism have made his home an incredibly violent one, and he can't take it anymore. Jeff quickly realises that life isn't any easier out here. And on these streets, where syringes and broken glass line the footpaths, he must fend for himself. He does what he has to do to survive out here. The next 2 decades follow the same pattern. Robberies, prison, robberies, prison. At age 37, sitting in a jail cell once again, Jeff has a realisation. There must be more to life than this. I'm Middleton and this is Head Game. Today, how Jeff Morgan changed his path from a life inside to a life of inspiration. Jeff Morgan, listen, thank you ever so much for joining me on my podcast, Head Game. Funny enough, I bumped into this gentleman in the airport not long ago, a couple of months ago, and we started talking about leadership and about life. Really, really interesting upbringing and, hard. You suffered a lot. You've been through a lot. You've obviously come out the other end right now. That's why you're sat here with me. But talk me through your childhood. Talk me through where it all started, where you started to see things, because the first memories you had weren't pleasant ones, were they?
No. Like, you're looking up and your parents are drinking at night. You're up until all hours of the morning. Music's pumping in the house. Dad takes you up to the TAB to sit around and while he's gambling. Then you're going back into the house. There's more drugs, alcohol being used, and that was just a normal way of life. So I just thought that was
your
normal.
First memories. That's what you remember. Alcohol, drugs, gambling.
Absolutely. And other people were kicking football with their son or something of that nature, or, doing something where you're playing toys. I didn't have toys. People don't realise the depth of that conversation, and to be able to just be yourself as a kid. I was in survival mode from the get-go, I suppose. You'd have uncles that walk past. It made me very tough, who would slap you and say, don't be like the rest of us. And literally, I'm talking about grown, strong, solid men within the community that were feared by the community, and here I was getting slapped by them. Imagine, as an 8-year-old kid, what that instills in yourself. And the fear that I had within my own safe home was what led me to, jumping out of that window and going onto the streets at 12 years of age and never looking back. And I felt safer on the streets of Sydney than I did in that home. And imagine having that vision of your parents being, perpetrators or whatever you want to call it back then. In my vision, I look back and obviously I see how they were equipped and what time, energy and effort they put into themselves, and the trauma they had and the lives they had. I found out a lot about them. I dug deep and what happened to them and why did they end up in that position and how did they end up in that position, because I want to continue the journey of not ever being that. So
but you loved your parents growing up, right? Your mum's your mum, your dad's your dad. You because you knew no better, were you led to believe that this was normal everyday life and this is how you will grow up and this is who you will become?
Yeah, I never really thought about it, but in amongst it, you love your parents, man.
Of course.
And even to this day, I still love my parents. And as much as it might have been harsh back then, those lessons up until 12 really put me in good, the discipline. My father was very disciplined in amongst that. Sounds a bit of a crazy transition. Take me down the park, 100 kicks with my left foot, 100 kicks with my right foot. Was a passionate football or soccer here in Australia fan. So go down, practice that, and that took me to good levels of the game at a young age, and that discipline rolled into the rest of my life. So I'm forever grateful. I was walking up a mountain in New Zealand last week, and I remember he said, "Oh, what do you hate doing?" I said, as a kid, I said, "Oh, I hate hills. The hills kill me." Next morning we go out, he says, "We're doing 100 hills at this absolutely ridiculous." And halfway through that, I started to get this new version of myself. I was like, "I love hills. Keep up, old man," and like. I started to actually embrace it. I'm going up the hill last week and I said, "I still love hills." And my mate turned around and he knows the story. He's like, you know, he's...
Come on.
And I was like, man.
That ignition from when you were so young, that memory come flooding back.
I literally pointed to the sky and I said, "I still love hills. Thank you for making me who I am today." And, you know, as much as it was a harsh upbringing, if I look at it that way, then I always sit within that and know, you know, that.
But do you think you took on those moments because they were so rare and it showed, you know, that's what you were craving? I think when a lot of people go through what you went through at such a young age, and those moments that parents do like every weekend or every other weekend with their kids, those moments were few and far between with yourself. Do you think that you held on to those moments because that's what you craved, that's what you wanted ultimately from life and from your dad?
Absolutely. You want it's like life. Everyone wants what something you don't have, and I see Ant have that. I want that. Yeah. I see that person buy that car. We all are geared towards that as human beings, and I think that goes back to the DNA of us in survival mode. Want food. I want what they want. How did they get that? How did they acquire that? And for me, just seeing my parents in that regard, and I always wanted to, you know, as much as it seems dark, I look back and I look at the strengths, and they gave me probably 2,000% of their 100%. Yeah. Whereas we look back on things and say, why did they treat me like that? You know, stuff my parents and all of the above. But you got to look at the level of their game, and their game is their mindset, their life, their habits, their rituals, their beliefs, and what they'd given time to or not given time to, and the level of, they probably exceeded expectations as parents towards what they try to give me, and I took a lot from my mother, who was a very peaceful person, and I've got that side, and people are like, I can't picture you as that person. My partner, she goes, "I just don't understand how you were that person. It just doesn't make sense." And
doesn't compute.
And that's coming from 12 years of being with my mother. And so it was, imagine if I had those extra years, and there must have been greatness in those times that I craved. Because on the other side, it made me tough, it made me strong, it made me resilient. And I've taken that, and this field of life is a landmine, man. You walk out, you're going to get hit, and the ability to understand that and strategize for that, and then go out to the world and make sure that I'm avoiding these landmines and stepping into bliss more often than not, comes from those moments that I didn't get, but also crave for so much, and still live in my life to this day. And I think having that means that I'm not in a honeymoon period of a relationship, of life. I'm in life, and that's a constant give back and to yourself, and that happiness, that childhood hasn't disappeared from me within myself, but also I can step into a professional sense and create an outcome. That's a great skill to have, and I'm grateful for my parents for giving me that. Yeah,
but you learnt the hard way, right? You learnt through trial and error, because those moments were so few and far between. You hit the streets at a really, really young age. You say at 12 years old you were jumping out your window and hitting the streets. Take me back to the 12-year-old Jeff Morgan.
12 years old, down the road, the main car park, there's a long travelator, and I'd sleep on that travelator. It was warm under there. I found, and I look back on that, and I started to find solutions even then. But I just went, I need strategies to make sure that I'll protect myself, because I jumped out of a space to protect myself. Well, let's make sure you do that. And I slept on that travelator, and I'd press emergency stop. The travelator would stop, and I'd actually feel if someone was walking along it, and I'd jump up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you'd feel the vibration. I'd jump up and say, "Hey, what's happening?"
So you're becoming real street smart at the age of 12, which no other 12-year-old really ever experiences. You're learning about the streets. You're learning about how to survive, basically. Because
absolutely.
And did you survive better on the streets than in your own house at that age? Or did you have
I'd say within the first year, yes. Like at that point in time, I started to acquire food more often than not. I had a roof over my head. We stayed at a hotel up the road. I don't even know if it exists anymore. It was $20 a night, CB Hotel. Big shout out to you. And I don't even know how we got in there. I don't know if we got someone to get the hotel or they just took the money and they didn't care that we were that young. And
so you used to sleep in a hotel, $20 a night.
$20 a night.
To hustle that and get that
$140 a week. So how did I make that money at 12 years of age? And I found we got into a canteen. We'd get into the canteen, take 3 bags of chips. 1 we'd eat on the spot. 2 we were taught by my grandmother, only take what you need as a proud Aboriginal man, and make sure the planet stays as best it can. So for me, I took those 2 extra packets, myself and my brother, breakfast and lunch. We'd get in there at night once it shut down again. And I just look back on that and, I just saw – people always ask me, when did you become an entrepreneur? And I said, at 12 when I jumped out onto the streets, because you had to. I just had to become good at what we did. And unfortunately, it was destructive, but that's what I truly believe that's why I didn't change for a long time. I was built in survival mode, and I was built to just think that was normal behaviour. And growing up in the community, I actually felt like I was doing better than the community was at 12 years of age. So therefore, I must be doing the right thing. Why is everybody judging me? Why do I get locked up for this? I'm just doing the best to look after me. And why aren't you helping me as a police officer or a corrections or juvenile justice at that time? And I think back to that kid, and I'm proud of that kid. I look back sometimes and say, people ask the question, what would you say to that kid? And I used to think, you should have done better and lock him up, throw away the key, which we often hear from society. But what if if we've got that judgment, we've got the solution, let's sit down with a kid like that and say, hey, let's role model you into a better place and space. I had great skills, had drive, determination, perseverance. So I did that skills audit and said, what if you
lacked direction, you lacked opportunity, you lacked, it's evident in how you come across, because later on in the years when you know where to find that opportunity, where you self-direct through trial and error, where you are today, they're all the lessons that you've learned from the age of 8, 12, through your teenage years. But you stuck to the streets through your teenage years, and you ended up in prison quite early, didn't you?
Yeah, I was locked up at 12. Before that, I'd done a lot of boarding homes. I wouldn't even know what you'd call them. And one of those times for myself, I look back and I remember smashing the window with my fist because I could see my father walking off. And I was like, don't leave me here, Dad. And
you was at a boarding home?
Yeah, down at Bondi.
Take me through that moment, because it sounds like quite a powerful moment.
Yeah, to me, I look back on that and it was very traumatic. As a kid, imagine being dropped off, you're not with your mother, your father's dropping you off at this unknown place, and you're in a bunch. I just remember a dorm, a whole bunch of kids, and I jumped up to the window, which was an extended height, so I had to climb too. And I remember sitting on the ledge, looking down and seeing him walk off, and then seeing him look back at me and I look back at it now and probably the despair in his eyes. He probably just didn't have the capacity, money, financially to look after myself. We bounced between.
But at that age, you're thinking you're being abandoned by your own father, right?
Absolutely.
You can't comprehend that, and it's great that you look back in hindsight and that you're compassionate the way you are. But at 12 years old, you get dropped off into a stranger's home. You got all these strange kids that you don't know. And then you see your father walking off and look back at you. That must have absolutely torn you to shreds, mate.
I just remember having glass in my hand and the window had shattered, and I kept smashing that window to try and literally get out the window in my head. And I'm thinking, you so-and-so in my head and all of the above, and why are you doing this to me? You don't love me. And that abandonment, once I ran away onto the streets, as you said, I found my crew, and graffiti was taking off in Australia at the time. The New York subway culture was well and truly in amongst it. There was kids hanging out at town hall up the road here in the main part of Sydney, and for us, we were just gathering around and wanting to be a part of something. And your tag or your graffiti name was
what was your tag?
Costy.
Costy.
Yeah. So I became one of Sydney's. I'm in books within Sydney.
Were you good at tagging? Were you quite the artist?
I was
shall we
an
say?
artist.
Because now it's classed as art, right?
Absolutely.
You get, back then it was classed as graffiti, and it was classed as you destroying public property. But now you get buildings and
hotels
estates that go right. Can you graffiti the wall as part of the the art of it? But back then you were just going. And was your tag important that people saw your tag and they where your tag was your domain, was your territory, and it was a sign of, listen, this is where I am.
Even in that sense, yeah, absolutely, like validation.
Yeah,
and
validation,
everyone's like, hey, Costy.
Yeah.
And we had PIC, Partners in Crime. So we were a crossover between making money but also doing graffiti on trains, and we did it really well. And even
did that make you feel good? When people are like, it's Costy, mentioning your name all of a sudden.
Absolutely.
And again, you're rising up in that street life. You're becoming someone. You've got a sense of belonging. And all of a sudden, and again, there's that power as well, isn't it? You're like, right, listen, I'm part of this street family.
And I created it even more so. So imagine having the crew under you. If you wanted to be a part of my crew, really, you had to come through me. So to have that power, to have that validation, to be seen on trains, and then see your own artwork on trains, it was just all like, oh, now I am somebody. I am valued. I do matter. I am loved. I am cared for. I just remember sitting, you could go up to Town Hall and all the artists would sit there and they go, oh, he's Costy. So, hang around. If we had social media, then everyone would have wanted to get a photo. So that notoriety at that level. So
And did that go to your head?
Absolutely.
Course,
you thrive on it. You just, and you didn't get it.
You're someone, you're loved, you're accepted, you're part of this organisation, you're part of this new family.
Somewhere in amongst that, my mother sat. So I was always, it sounds weird, but like you're validated, but you're also humbled. And I think I had a real different head game to myself, I look at that, and even that, the entrepreneurial side, I used to say what I did, I'd get on the city crossover, so I wouldn't go beyond Central, and I'd stay in the city, and I'd jump on all the different lines, and they're like, how do you get on all the lines? Where they'd travel out on the Bankstown line, which is one line, and then they'd spend a whole day trying to put themselves on trains, where I just jumped in the city and I was transferring between trains, and they went out to all these lines. I don't understand how you get out onto all these trains. Where do you get the time to do that? And I was like, well, you just come in the city. And I didn't tell anybody that, but that was my little trick. So even that entrepreneurial mindset of how can I be the most known and most seen and most revered, I suppose.
Yeah, safeguarding what you've got, right? You
Absolutely.
didn't want to let it go. You don't want to. You want to safeguard that. You want to.
It's crazy.
You've worked hard for it. You've suffered for it. It is
led to an innovative way of crime too.
Yeah.
So we started to distract shopkeepers, go out the back, open the safe, lock the safe up, and they wouldn't even know we'd done that during the day. So we'd distract the shopkeeper, and then you'd find what type of shops would have more money than the rest. And that was just a survival skill. And we became Partners in Crime, became a very famous crew towards making money. So if you wanted to make some money and be a part of that crew, and then we started to travel even as a 12. When I first got locked up, I got locked up in Newcastle, which is 3 hours out of Sydney. And I've been asked, why did you travel there? And I think it was just, I wanted to enjoy life and see life differently. And, as a 12-year-old kid to be up in Newcastle, that was innovative. By 14, I was in different parts of this country doing what we were doing and, taking the graffiti game there, taking the crime there. And I just look back on it and think, that kid had some oomph in him.
Yeah, had some minerals in him.
How can I shift and change that destructiveness to constructiveness? And that's where I started to shift and change. At 16, I walk up the lane. It was the quarter block. It was 4 streets, and up the middle of that was a laneway. And it was our safeguard. Like, you come up there, there was no way, whether you're a police officer, you had the riot police there, there's footage you can acquire at the top of Redfern Station from Molotov cocktails, 5 metres away from police officers in, all their kit and caboodle, and we're throwing bricks and rocks and have no fear in that sense. So growing up in that light and thinking that was normal, just insane. And I look back and say that kid did well to be able to shift and change that behaviour. And if I can do it, you can do it.
was there a fracture between your Indigenous background and, you know, the Australian sort of culture? Was that at play at all? You know, did you have an Indigenous gang, or, you know, what was it like?
No, like, so
Or
there was
the
a
street,
mixture.
or the streets are the streets, you know, where there's a mixture of everyone.
And I think
Talk to me about
breaks
that
it
mixture.
down. That's a great question, because I didn't see a colour or race or religion, and it taught me great skills to just judge a person on who they are and how they conduct themselves. And
the reason I asked that, because there was no hate there. There's no sort of victim mentality there. There was no, you were just going out hustling on the streets, making money, you know, embracing people that could benefit the organisation, could benefit you.
Absolutely, for the best interest of the environment. And I heard something that you had, I can't remember what show it was on. You said they were talking about war, and do you ever feel bad about doing what you did to other people? And you said there's a threshold, and at that threshold you just got to do what you got to do. And I think the streets made us the same. We had to do what we had to do. And even when I did it, this might sound crazy, I was a bank robber by the end of Armour Guards, which is, you know, a really high respected regard in the criminal world, or if you can make money at a really high level. And I didn't want to hurt anybody in amongst that. My vision was, even during this bank robbery, we make it as smooth as we possibly can and make sure that everyone's, take a seat, mate, if there was old people in the bank. Never snatched a handbag in my life, and because we just had this, I had this weird thing.
It's that line of, I get it, it's that line of respect. I know, but people go, oh, you've got no respect for nothing and no one, but ultimately that you've got huge respect for people, for things, but you just brought up, and sometimes you can't, you know, pick your cards, right? You were just brought up in this was your best way of surviving, of getting through, of making something for yourself and becoming someone. And ultimately along the way you're like, right, let's respect people, I don't want to hurt people, I don't want to go down that line, but you know, we got to do what we got to do.
It was even the cars we got were luxury cars, and I was like, they won't miss them, they got money. And in general, you know, to me it was just, I had a weird twisted mentality about, let's not hurt people, and let's make this as quick as possible and get in and get out. And even those that, you know, if I look at it now, if anyone was ever on the other side of that, I'd be happy to give my skill set to them for the rest of their life until they were in a position where they lived a better life again, rather than in trauma. Because I've been able to step away from that trauma of the upbringing, and instead of talking about trauma, talking about wellness and greatness and the lessons that became blessings within my life from that. You know,
I love how you don't use the trauma, you don't use, you know, race, religion, ethnicity, you don't use any of that.
What religion or what country you're from, or what are your beliefs? Oh, what? I'm here and my hands are folded now. I just like, anyone gets an opportunity, and even if they don't and they burn me, where does this come from for them? What did their parents teach them? Because I understand it. And in society, that's where we lose so much. Like, look, this young kid, lock him up, throw away the key. I'm like, this kid's been abused at home, I guarantee. And as long as we lock him up, we only surround him with other people that have been through the same abuse. Yet then you run a campaign on, let's protect women and children. I'm like, well, these kids are going through exactly the same thing. And you're telling us to lock them up, throw away the key. That doesn't make sense. Like, because have you understood the abuse that went on in that home? You walk into that house and you understand it in 5 minutes. Yeah. Get someone from a richer, affluent suburb to go and live in that house for 1 week, and they'll say, wow, get me out of here. I need to run for the hills. And I understand that as well. But how do we merge that together so the world's a better place? The old word of Millerism, make the world a better place through human effort. And I think that's something that we as society could do better.
So you're getting deeper and deeper, Jeff. Do you realise how deep you're getting, or are you just climbing the ranks and now you're onto bank robberies, and before you know it, you're like, wow, how the hell did I get here?
It's crazy. We went from they call it searching, distracting shopkeepers, and it was an art form for all us inner city boys. It was just normal, and I had such a big name there within the system. Once again, I'm loved and revered, and I'm very innovative. We get into these stolen luxury cars. We're going into town in the middle of the day, smashing into duty-frees, jewelry stores, having no fear of anybody. And That transitions into same cars, but now snatching money off bank counters, what are being deposited, or just on closing time they'd count up on the counter, and we'd walk up, 50,000 on the counter, snatch the money, run out of the bank, see you later, and I didn't realise. It was just so normal, and
you didn't realise you were getting deeper and deeper down this.
The business side of things, I was saying, if I can get 50 grand in a day, let me chill for a little bit, and rather do it every single day searching, I could step back and do it once and have a rest for 6 weeks and come back. But we had such a habit that we'd do it every day anyway.
Yeah,
and we'd be walking along and we'd go, look at that.
It became a habit.
Yeah, it just became
Were you sort of addicted to it?
I'd say we were without realising that we were, because we're unconscious. And most of society, as you
don't realise you're addicted, right?
And society, through this unconscious nature, we wake up, we go through the realms of your day, and we're unconscious during that whole day around the decisions we're making and the life we're not living. And a lot of people just exist. They're dead at 25 and buried at 75. They want more from life, but they're not actually conscious of the life they want until they sit down and say, how can I take this unconscious thought I've been thinking about starting, training, a business, a life, travelling to a location, and actually make that a reality? And I think that's what we had a skill of, because we just had to do, or in our eyes we were doing. And then it becomes such a adrenaline rush and you're doing it with your mates. How good's this? Life's good. Exchange time for money, but in a different sense of time for money. And I learned that in business, don't exchange time for money. Well, at some point in time, I had that unconscious conversation where, is this actually serving me, and could I do it a different way?
When do you realise that, wow, I'm in deep now? Was it, you got a hefty prison sentence. When do you realise that things need to change? You are going to be in prison your whole life if it doesn't.
I go to segregation or to slot in Melbourne, Port Phillip prison.
So you've been sentenced at this stage?
No, so I'm going to trial. During the trial...
And what are you looking at during the trial?
If I get found guilty, in my head I'm thinking I'm doing 10 years. So
10 years.
We had this thing, if one of us can get off, we're going to lie or do whatever we could to get off, right? I become that person. During that trial, I go back to the prison, I say, my QC, very well-known QC in Australia, your men need to come to court and say what they need to say, or, will they come and, yep, no problems. I go back to the jail and say, hey, I need you to come to court, and that needs to happen tomorrow. They're going to put in the thing. You need to say yes, all good. Two of those actually turn around and say, I'm not going to stuff myself up, because they'd already pled guilty for sentencing. I have to ring my solicitor was the answer from another one.
And was this for bank robbery?
Yeah. And I was down in Melbourne, and which is 8 hours out of Sydney. To give context for people, we'd travelled 8 hours down there, robbed this bank. I knew we were under surveillance, and I mentioned that to him. I said, I feel we're under surveillance. We do this bank robbery. Police watch the bank robbery. We still get away from the bank robbery. So I look back on that. What skill did we have to organise, plan, and I realised that they might have been...
Take me through that bank robbery.
I had a feeling that they were onto us. So what we did, we looked at this other bank and said, this is it, and gave them this sort of
brush off.
Yeah, and they set up at that bank. And it's probably saved us, because we run out in special operations group there, similar to yourselves, and as you know, one shot and we're down, and that's it. It's all over. My life's finished at that point in time. They had the helicopter squad, the dog squad. I look back on it and I'm like, I'm proud that we were able to operate at that level in the sense of
surveillance, mate. That's pretty. That's pretty. And
in a
tactical,
business sense, when I say that proud, I don't mean proud of the crime. I mean proud of the business acumen that I had in that world. And I said, we're going to ditch these people, and we're going to do it this way. And by the time they realised, they said, no, it's the other bank that they actually looked at. That's what they're doing. And the surveillance team had watched us. They can't arrest us. They don't have the powers to arrest you, which is pretty crazy. They're sworn-in police officers, but they watch it and they report and capture. And we come out, slide across the bonnet of this car and think it's, Dukes of Hazzard, and how good is this? And money's on my back, and we get chased by this police officer, and I said this bloke was either a police officer or motocross rider or something. He rode too good. But I'm in custody. I'm at trial. During that trial, I had a phone in the ledge of a windowsill. I dug that out. Very innovative. Made up this screw that actually undid that ledge, and you couldn't get that in jail really, but I got it made up. It was in a really safe spot, but one day I get back from court and they go, "You're going this way, Morgan." And I was like, "No, that's a slot and segregation. Why am I going that way? I'm not there." And he said, "Mate, we found a phone in your cell." I was like, "How did they find that phone?" It was in the butter, so they took it out, the boys during the day, the same crew, used it in the day, put it in the butter. So that sort of, I suppose, annoyed me that they'd done that. Whatever. I'll roll with the 3 months in the slot. So you're 3 months in there by yourself, sitting there during a trial. You're getting back later. It's one of the most traumatic parts of prison is the court process. People don't realise that. Being in and out of that truck, going into court. I don't smoke. People are smoking in the truck, and the smoke doesn't escape anywhere. You're travelling about an hour in peak hour traffic, and it's an absolute nightmare in the truck. And then you sit in the cells all day, you're not fed properly, you get up at 3 a.m. So that whole process...
And this is in segregation, right?
And then you add segregation where you go back and you don't have the reprieve of a good bed or the bed's better than the slot. The slots are just nothing. You pretty much got nothing there, and no TV, no nothing. But I get back, you're down here, Morgan, I go to trial, I get found guilty, and I get on this truck one day and I
get found guilty for the robbery.
Yeah, it was going really well. The second last day that I actually overheard, I'm listening to her phone calls, the leading officer, and she said, "This FP is about to get off this trial." And I was like, and even my QC said, "You're going to beat this." And I was like, "I am going to beat this." And the last moment they rip out this evidence, and the evidence was just enough. It was me taking off this jacket. You were in the Sahara Desert. You couldn't see who it was, but they clearly throw the jacket in, and that same jacket I was photographed in. There was only 50 of those jackets in Australia, but we still argued it could be 49 other people that did that. So in the end, they found me guilty, and I got in that truck that day. I was meant to go back with everybody else. The paperwork hadn't been finished. I went back in the truck by myself, and I just broke down and cried, and to be honest with you. And he's this big, tough, strong person that's respected in the system in the back of this truck. I was
done for. This is you now. You're
big sentence coming.
Did you ever think that was
my
going to
mates
come?
have let me down. Not my mates, my brothers. They were brothers for 20 years. We had a crew that was very solid for 20 years, and someone usually sleeps with one another's partner. Maybe you end up dead in that world. Someone wants your money or your life. They leave you posted. They don't look after you while you're in jail. We stuck together for that 20 years. So that moment was a turning point. And I was like, if you can do that to me that quickly, what have you done to me prior to this? Did you, how was my wife with you? Because they were going to visit my wife and look after.
Do you feel like you've been abandoned once again?
So it gave me that thing. I was like, and you're on that battlefield and I'm relying on you to give me cover fire. And I say, you go, yeah, go now. And I run out and you go, oh, wait a second, I'll just check what's down in this little. Yeah. And you're like, you do your best. And that's where it was a turning point. And I said, I realised that they don't have my back any longer. And if they don't have my back, and it was a real turning point in the business sense and life sense as well, because it made me realise the only one ever coming to save you is you. But if you get the right people around you, you can move good as a unit, as you would know. So I just went, what were the strengths that we had as a group? And to be able to do the stuff we did was phenomenal. And we operated at a really high level. Even police respected us. So when they got us, they had a normal behaviour of definitely accidentally slipping over with their elbow on your head or something of that nature. And I mean that respectfully to the police force. But it was a part of the game, I suppose, that you accepted. But then, even in Melbourne, they didn't assault us because they just went, you're really good, how you operate at a really high level, and we actually respect it. And, but could you put those skills, and we'd have these conversations in police stations, what if you put those skills to good use?
What if you did, right? Was that going through your head then once you were sentenced? Were you sentenced for 10 years?
No, so I got 10 years with 7 years on the bottom. So you serve 7 years. If you play up, you serve the 10 years.
Got
so
it.
I always, it was weird. I did education in the system to make sure I got my parole date, or when I got sentenced, he's done computers, business, whatever it was, anger management, conflict resolution. And it was always about scheming, getting off something or getting out quicker.
Mm-hmm.
But what I didn't realise I actually started to build myself better, and that's how I shifted out of that world. I was like, I started to see things through the same light, but just saying, how could I do this in a way that
Through a different lens, right? You had the same acumen, you had the same business mindset, but now you're looking through a different lens because the whole street life has come crumbling down on you. It's buried you alive. You've come out the rubble. No one's there apart from yourself, but you've still got this about yourself. And
it's your units walking across that landfill. The first two that go out get blown up, and you're like, well, we can keep trying this same pathway, but it's destructive.
Yeah.
Let's go around. There's more fire there, but this is, we're open and we're walking through this field. Let's try another avenue. And that's what I started to do. I said, this is it. I'm going to have a crack. And that's 7 years. Even during that, I was very conscious, and I probably became the most conscious I ever became in my life. That 3 months in segregation, going back to that, I started to ask all these questions which form and shape what I do today. And who are you? What do you want from life? And what is happiness? And these words. And I sit with people, and people, it's like that little toy that comes out and tries to grab the toy, the machine.
yeah, the claw.
The claw. And what's it grabbing? What's it actually grabbing at?
Yeah.
Like when you go for something, I ask, what is your happiness and what does it look like? Where does it happen? Who are you with? And people sit there and start crying. And it blows me away. And I'm like, I used to say, what are you crying for? In my head. And I'd realise that they don't even know what that looks like. Similar to me as a young 12-year-old kid, I don't know what playing with toys look like. So for them, they've never sat and thought about it, and they've just said, here's what life is. I'm going to pay my bills and eat, and that's it, and get wrinkly and old, sell my house, travel the world wrinkly and old. And could you do the same thing younger? And what would that mean to you?
You've been caught. You're smart enough, clearly smart enough to realise that you have to look at life through a different lens. You have to take a different direction. You're by yourself. Was there a moment where you felt relieved and you were just like, you could take that breath of relief and go, right, now the rebuild starts, and guess what? I'm here by myself. I'm going to do it by myself.
As sitting in there, I cut myself open. I call it a live autopsy on myself. And I just dug all that out. And by the time I'd come out, not even by the time, during custody, we'd sit and talk about how to do the next bank robbery, how to avoid things, turn alarms off, turn cameras off. And during that period, I just went, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing this. So it was, the heaviness went in there. And there was many things that happened. I had this bird I found on the ground, little budgie, and I picked it up and said, I found this bird. And they said, you can't touch it. You've got to look after it now. If you want, the mother will reject it. So I bring this bird up and it would sit on my shoulder. And then one day I said,
in prison?
Yeah, in prison. So it was, and it's real. You've got all these tough men tattoos, and you got this little bird on your shoulder walking around. And they're like, Morgs, what is this bird? And I can't even remember the bird's name to this day. I'm like, I've got to remember. And I don't know why I can't remember that bird's name. Yeah. But I named it something about what it did. And I just remember one day I said, I've got to walk this bird outside, and if it flies off, it flies off. That's its natural nature, let it go. And it flew off, and I went, well, that's it. And I was sitting there reading a book, and it came back and sat on my shoulder, and I think about all these little things, and I was like, you're joking, it came back. And I had it for about 6 months, and then one day I forgot to get it in, and it got locked out of the unit, and it poured rain that night, so I don't know if that's what did it to it or what happened, but I found it dead out the front, and I was like, But I look back and these transitionings of letting go of everything, and I think I felt like that was my mother coming back to me and just sort of giving me a bit of take away the heaviness and know that, I just did my best with yourself, and it's time to free yourself from these shackles. My father died when I was in custody down there, and that morning a crow came back. It was like 5 o'clock in the morning, and the crow just was relentless, wah, wah, wah. And I was like, to the point where I got up and said, what are you trying to tell me? And that morning the governor calls me up when we were on let go, and he says, come to the governor's office, and said, your father passed away last night. So I felt like he came back in that journey, and it was just like, this is your turning point. And I was studying, learning about business, but not budgeting, money, investing, those sorts of things.
So your mind, you had a mindset shift on, right, take the skills and business acumen that I have, but shift it to society, shift it to Civvy Street where I can be you. Oh, so whilst you're in there, you were just learning and learning and learning.
I was on the grind,
but in the right direction, right? So when you were released, you could enter society as a model civilian,
huge,
and then hopefully attack life in the same aspect that you had whilst you were on the streets, but to succeed as a businessman, as
Absolutely.
an entrepreneur.
And I learned a lot about, it was real crazy, like the Romans, everything, all past. And the values, the principles, the morals. Oh, I went so deep. It was pretty crazy, to be honest. But when I say deep, not to the point where it was all factual, and everything I learnt was factual, and I was like, oh, wow, that's how they operated. What if, so I'm that person. I see Ant Middleton, what's he doing? How's he operate? Wow, that's a great quality. I'll learn that, take that. Yeah. And if you do that in your unit, you become better at 100%. Firing a shot or fitter or understanding the environment or whatever it may be. So same thing in principle for me. How do I understand this business environment? And I was learning it from some of these blokes were at the top of their game within, the business world. So what could I learn from them? And I had that time that they probably could charge hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to somebody to learn. And here I was sitting in the yard, but I'd let that go in the past. Now I was sitting with that person and saying, what do you think like that? And I exchanged it for the protection of them without ever having that conversation. They knew it, I knew it. They knew that they weren't from that world, and people were going to say, "And you got money, you transferred 20 grand in my account, or you're not going to be here next week." And I'd say, that person's with me. And literally just by sitting down without saying it, they knew that person was with me, and no one would hassle them. So they knew it, I knew it, and it was a great exchange of value that shifted my life. And I came out after 7 years. I had the parole in Sydney, so I'd written to them, I'd taken ownership, come get me, I want to finish my parole up there, which I had outstanding. They didn't come get me. I walked out the gates, which was a real bummer at the time because I didn't want to walk out and then have to go and hand myself back in. It was a real bittersweet moment. You're out, you're like, oh, freedom. And I know it sounds crazy, fresh air.
100%.
And just, that transition, go back into custody, and now coming back to Sydney, seeing the difference between those two systems. Sydney's such a gladiator, you're in battle mode. So as soon as I go in, they're in race wars, here I am trying to shift and change, but at the same time you've got to be, and I think that's that threshold you spoke about. When you're on that warfield, you just have to be a different person, and you can be who you want out here. If you get misappropriate
you have to put
funds,
different body armours on, different masks on, different helmet, hypothetically,
do you want to do
survive.
it sometimes? But at the same time, it's survival of the fittest, and if you don't do what you need to do. And then I took that toughness, grit, that tenacity, that whatever you want to call it. I got this mentality, me and you in the Coliseum, and they're like, Ant's been here, done that. I said, well, today's the day that Ant's not walking out of the Coliseum. And if you don't do that for yourself in life, it is an absolute war out there, and most importantly, war in your head. It's like saying, Ant, there's a war out there, we're just going to drop you in without any training, and when you see someone, just shoot. That's not a strategy. That's a hope strategy. And how many people are doing that out here in society? Because we just go out and we say, all right, we're going to learn at school, but did you learn how to actually deal with your emotional IQ, or your stress and time management, or relationships? And when it comes up, now you can't manage your emotions. So now domestic violence enters the family home. You split the family up. Now the kids are out without the kids, and that rolls off into, the environments we're in. Maybe it's a mate that we had, and we don't even have that conversation with a mate and pretend it didn't even happen.
Yeah.
How can we build a better world? And that means just taking that ownership and accountability to what we could be and starting to work towards that and accept that we can be better.
The one thing I've noticed with you, Jeff, is that you are a good person, a good man, and you've kept that morality throughout everything that you've done. And now you're giving back to society, aren't you? You're traveling the world. You speak so much sense. You're a very, very smart, intelligent guy, and that comes from obviously what you've learned. And you're in a very similar situation than myself, really, aren't you?
Love
so
and life.
Talk to me. Talk to me about what you do now, and who you are, and what your future plans are.
As we do a lot around leadership, the mindset and the well-being of organisations, high performance habits, resilience building within that space, stress and time management, emotional IQ, and that unconscious to conscious pathway. And I've been able to travel around the world, very blessed to be able to do that, travel out into Aboriginal communities, sporting clubs within this country at the highest level. And to me, it's just, to be able to wrap up what you learnt into something that you can give as a gift to somebody if they choose to do so, and bring consciousness to a space. And I know it's very hard, but a lot more people are starting to the ice baths, the mindfulness and all of the above, and the benefits of. If you can understand what I call the VB of any conversation, the value and benefit towards a space, when you understand how you can put yourself in those environments, and is there more that you can get out of this environment, what could you do to do that, and how could we facilitate that and make you understand that? Not only make it happen for you, but also understand it so you can then do that for yourself ongoingly. We can go from a drug user, heavy drug user. I'll give you a great example of a young kid who recently on the ice, 4 months later has a functioning business that is in 6 figures, 4 months. That whole journey was all consciousness. And people, in their eyes, wishy-washy, we want to high performance the organisation. Let's scale it back a bit and do X, Y, and Z. And when you do that, they're like, but we want to get an outcome. And I'm like, by the end of it, they've, their projections on how much they made, the less sick days and how much they saved, and those that aren't, quitting the job because of mental health, how much is that worth? And that's what the word amazing, consciousness of the unconscious, that transition is worth, priceless.
Love that, mate. Listen, I could chat to you all day, and it's a privilege knowing you, mate. I bumped into you, like I said, a few months ago at the airport.
Crazy.
And I felt the energy. I knew that you was a good guy from the moment I met you, mate. And I can purely say and honestly say that is definitely the case. And I believe that's what's got you here today, is you being an overall good egg, mate. So, but listen, thanks ever so much for coming on my podcast, mate. Keep giving back, mate. That's all we can do,
mate. I appreciate you. You ain't anybody until you, and that means that you got to put that work into yourself. Love yourself more.
Cheers, Jeff. Thanks, mate.
Ledge.
To find out more about Jeff's work, head to jeffreymorgan.com.au. Thanks for listening to this episode of Head Game. If you enjoyed it, I'd love if you could leave me a review. I'm Middleton. Catch you in the next episode.